All right, it's 8 o'clock. We got a good crowd here so far, 36 people. I'm going to start the meeting. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining in. I'm looking forward to the discussion. This time, the Tigers are going to have more to talk about than in previous years, and I was, I guess, unnecessarily pessimistic this spring, although not totally. On the other hand, we're better off if Rogelio joins and gives a spiel than I do. He went to more games and knows the minor leagues inside out. So 801. Okay, so the plan is the same as before. We're going to have a brief summary for every team in order of the standings at the end of the year, and then we're going to open up the general discussion and hopefully have a good discussion like we normally do. So I got a couple more people just came up. Vince, I think you're going to do the Cleveland honors, right?
That is my understanding as well.
Yep. Okay, good. And Rogelio just showed up, so you'll get a good prep from Rogelio. I would do it, and I could do a decent job, but he'll do a better job. Okay, folks, thanks. Vince, you want to introduce yourself briefly and then give it a whirl?
Sure. I'm Vince Guerrieri. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of the Jack Graney SABR chapter here in Cleveland. It has been a very pleasant summer in Cleveland. When last we met, it was right after the All-Star break. The Guardians were in first place in the Central Division, had what I thought was a fairly comfortable lead. By the end of August, the lead was not quite as comfortable as it had been before. In fact, there was a point where the Guardians played the Royals in Cleveland, completely embarrassed themselves in the first couple of games. Lost, ended up falling into a tie with the Royals, but from there ended up going on a little bit of a tear. Won the division, got a first round bye, faced the Tigers in the division series, and it was a corker of a series. I feel like it was the best we could have hoped for as fans. Anybody without a rooting interest, I thought, would find it really enjoyable. Tigers fans probably not quite as enjoyable. It was actually a little stressful for me too, and for our troubles. We got to play the Yankees in the American League Championship Series, lost in 5 games. And I guess what really annoys me about that is we watched the Dodgers capitalize on the Yankees' mistakes, and the Guardians were unable to capitalize on some of the same mistakes in the championship series. The Guardians obviously had a very good year. Emmanuel Clase is a finalist for the Cy Young Award, which just serves to remind everybody that the voting for that took place before the postseason. And Stephen Vogt, as expected, is one of the candidates for Manager of the Year. In fact, all 3 finalists are from the Central Division, and I'm sure we will talk more about that as the evening goes on. Free agency is going to be very interesting. The Guardians' biggest free agent is, of course, Shane Bieber, who had all of 2 starts for the Guardians, looked really good in them, but ended up needing Tommy John surgery. And this is the 2nd year in a row that he missed significant time due to his injuries. Cobb is also a free agent, and Boyd is also a free agent, both key trade acquisitions for the team. Not really big trade acquisitions, but they definitely proved their worth down the stretch. And I feel like that's about what I got to say.
Well, bravo. You're well under your time limit, but you had a lot of information. And of course, you're also able to chime in later. I will say that I thought the series with Cleveland was really great baseball, aside from the fact that I'm annoyed by the 12 pitchers per game stuff as an older fan. But I
Well,
thought,
and unfortunately, that's what you have to do at least that's what the Guardians had to do. They were without Bieber in their starting rotation. They were without McKenzie in their starting rotation. Again, they were bringing back Boyd and Cobb, both of whom had serious time off for injuries as well. They didn't really, their bullpen was a strength. Starting pitching, which everybody thought was a strength, turned out not to be as much this year.
Yeah, no, I understand. And the Tigers did it for practically, well, for kind of the postseason, they did it for 2 months. But
Hmm.
I'd like to see someone try to repeat that for a season. I don't think anyone's going to try, but then again, I would be wrong that someone could get away with one and a half major league starters and pitching chaos for 2 months and make the postseason and be credible at it. I mean, it was a good team. So, okay. Well, thanks, Vince. So next up is the Royals, I believe, with the same record as the Tigers, but they held the tiebreaker, if I'm correct, and therefore get the honors of being second. Uh, Roger,
Yes.
you ready to go?
Yes, I am.
Okay, take it away.
What a season for the Royals. From 56 wins to a playoff spot again, unfortunately up against the mighty Yankees. And what a season award-wise for the Royals. Just announced today, the Royals got 2 Silver Sluggers in Salvador Perez, who won for the 5th time, and Bobby Witt Jr., who won for the 2nd time. Um, Witt is up as one of the 3 candidates for the most valuable player. Matt Cachero is up for Manager of the Year. Seth Lugo is up for Cy Young Award. And if you thought that would have happened after the 2023 season, you would have made a lot of money in Vegas. For as far as free agency, some of the Royals' late season pickups like Paul DeJong and Yuli Gurriel are up for free agency, so maybe not a big loss. The pitching rotation looks quite strong. What the Royals probably will need is a power hitting outfielder and another power hitter, because that was strongly lacking at the end of the season after Vinny Pasquantino got hurt. Everything, as the old song says, everything is up to date in Kansas City.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, and
Mhm.
good luck on the awards.
Yes.
It was an amazing summer in Detroit. Well, actually, all three of the top teams in the division overachieved compared to preseason projections. And the AL Central, which had not been a joke exactly, but had been considered the weakest division in baseball, finally showed some real strength and a good future. So, uh, hang on, I got to admit somebody here, but I'm going to introduce Rogelio Castillo, my friend and colleague from Detroit, Tigers minor league report, who's going to give you the Tigers readout. Rogelio, you ready?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Gary. So, you're speaking of strengths, by the way. Gary mentioned the word strengths. The Tigers had 4 players, 4 positional players with 2 or 2 or better WAR, and that is significant because the Tigers have struggled with that department for quite some time as far as positional players go. In total, they had 7 players with 2 or better WAR, with Tarek Skubal leading the way and probably going to win the Cy Young here. But the Tigers season was just chaos. The last 2 months or so, let's just start with the beginning of the year a little bit. Injuries really kind of played a factor in the Tigers' struggles a little bit, with Riley Green suffering injuries, and they really didn't have Kerry Carpenter. He was injured with back problems, so that kind of hindered them quite a bit. And all of a sudden, they really just kind of, and Cole Keefe off to a very cold start after signing a 6-year deal and being one of the first Tigers who basically got his job a long-term extension, which is something the Tigers have not been doing traditionally at all. To invest in the young, they've been investing in their farm system, which Cole Keefe is the first of many prospect or a few prospects that really contributed to the roster this year. Tyler Holton, who was a waiver signing, one of the probably better waiver pickups since, I don't know, since Jamie Walker in terms of pitchers. Maybe Jamie Walker might be a stretch, but anyway. But looking at some of what the Tigers have been able to do, you saw that both Parker Meadows and Spencer Torkelson spent some time in the minor leagues this season after struggling. But the biggest difference was Parker Meadows came back as a better player. Spencer Torkelson, the jury's still out on him, and the Tigers really just kept plugging away and just, as far as like just starting the pitching chaos kind of thing, it was it was a mother of necessity, really. The starting staff suffered quite a bit of injuries, and Casey Mize wasn't effective, and Matt Manning went back down to Toledo. So the Tigers, in terms of questioning, in terms of questions in the rotation, with some of the young starters they drafted, still a lot of uncertainty. And Scott Harris mentioned this in the postseason conference or end of the season conference, or press conference rather, that Tigers were going to spend on pitching. And then you saw of course, the agent today, or excuse me, Scott or Evan Petzold saying that Tigers are trying to extend to Skubal, but Boris basically said it wasn't a good enough offer. So the whole Tiger diatribe of that back and forth begins. But overall, Tigers made the postseason. No one expected it, and they gave Cleveland a run of their money. But I think the Tigers' lack of depth, lack of power really came back to haunt them. And so I think that's something hopefully they'll address in the offseason. I think they will make a trade to get that going. Their third base situation, Chase Young, I don't think is a long-term solution, but he was one of the young players that got some time. The Trey Sweeney trade, of course, who they got from the Dodgers and the Jack Flaherty deal, really paid off for them as well. But there's some young pieces in place. The Tigers finished over 500 for the first time since 2016, and we're seeing some positional player talent come out of the system. Normally it's pitching, but overall it's one step forward. It's just that now it's up to the front office to capitalize on that and take the next step forward. But we'll see what happens there. But in terms of the spending restrictions, I think that's where the Tigers might be at this offseason.
Okay, Rogelio, thank you. I don't know what I'm going to do. I was all set tonight to have to cut the mic from people who ran long, and nobody's running long. Okay, so we have the Twins. Gene, are you doing the honors?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. You ready to go?
Yeah, thank you. And not to make light of funerals, but I just got back from the Twins' funeral. It's been about a month now. It's been going on for about a month or more, and Twins fans are not too happy. When we got together before the season, we were all in almost 100% agreement that the Twins were favored to win the division, coming off last year, and things were looking good. The weakness was the fact that they did lose two starting pitchers from last year, Sonny Gray and Kenta Maeda. And they were going to be overly dependent upon their run scoring ability. That didn't really pan out this year. They had some injuries, as all teams do. They have to use I have to use the word collapse. They collapsed the latter part of the season. They were still actually favored to enter the playoffs. Let's see, I made a note. They were still favored to make the playoffs behind Cleveland as late as August 17th. 92% chance to still make the playoffs. And going back to mid-year, at one point mid-year, their run producing ability was working out pretty well. They ranked fifth in the majors in runs scored, but it slowly led to the collapse. Correa and Buxton, they were injured, but they returned in time for the last month or so. Even when they returned, there was a 37-game span where the Twins went 12-25. And during that span, they only averaged a little over 3.5 runs a game. And then Joe Ryan, one of their other starters, was hurt late. And then that forced them to use some rookies in the rotation, like Simeon Woods Richardson, who still seems like a pretty good prospect, but they weren't up to making up for the lack of offense. So the Twins did this in 2022. Also, they lost 20 out of their last 30 games in 2022. But this seemed much worse, simply because there was an extra chance for them to get into the playoffs with the wild card, and even going into the last week of the season, they had the tiebreaker against all the other three teams they were competing against, and all they had to do was just win a few games the last week of the season to make it interesting. They could not do that. They lost 8 out of their last 10. They lost 2 out of 3 to Boston, then 2 out of 3 to the Marlins. Then they finished up losing all 3 to the Orioles. The Twins fans still very upset. The hitting may not be what they thought it was going to be. This year, they announced, as Roger mentioned about the Silver Slugger, no Twins came close to earning a Silver Slugger this year. But as an insult to injury, they did have an ex-Twin win one today, Brent Rooker. He hit 39 homers for the A's, 30 home runs last year. So at least the Twins have an ex-player that won a Silver Slugger this year. So as I mentioned a couple of times already, Twins fans, they're still very upset over the collapse. And I'm not too sure about whether that's going to affect attendance next year or not, but it surely might. But I'm glad for the other 2 teams that made it in, Kansas City and Detroit. And not only did they make the playoffs, but they took care of Baltimore, Houston. So that was pretty good. So that's my recap for the Twins.
Yeah, I would say, Gene, I was perplexed by the Twins collapse too, because when my friends in Detroit in early to mid-August were thinking, we got a real chance, I'm saying, yeah, don't think so. Enjoy it while it lasts, but the Tigers would have to make a practically record stretch run, and the Twins would have to have an apocalyptic collapse, and the odds of both of them happening aren't very good. And of course, I was wrong. I couldn't believe how badly the Twins played. But that's life. Sometimes you're on the short end, and sometimes it breaks your heart, right? Okay, so we have the White Sox, and
Such as
there's
they are.
Richard prepared to officiate at the memorial service.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Just making sure. Very good. Okay. Well, clearly the AL Central was a very powerful division, so I think that just explains the White Sox record. But anyway, like um, clearly, as we know, the White Sox had one of the worst team records in history, although I think a case can be made it wasn't the worst. I mean, it wasn't as bad as the Cleveland Spiders. It was the worst,
Agreed.
the biggest number of losses in American League history, but it wasn't as bad as a winning percent as the 1916 Athletics, and most losses in modern, baseball history, but their winning percent was still better than the Mets because they're fractionally better because they played 2 more games and split them. So certainly among the worst teams. I don't know if necessarily the worst. I think as the last time I was on here indicated, mostly that was due. Well, I mean, they were bad on a lot of fronts, especially the offense. The offense was historically bad. The worst, by any measure, the worst offense in White Sox history. I think in raw runs, like in terms of just runs per game, it may have came in like 4th overall all time, but the other teams were all like dead ball era teams and the 68 White Sox, which were just, it was that low hitting era before things were adjusted. And so they they were bad there. Their defense wasn't good. The bullpen was awful. And but the starting pitching amazingly was sort of respectable. It was like I think by any standards league average, especially in the first half of the season when they had Garrett Crochet at full strength and Eric Fetty, who was doing well. And they were both among the AL leaders. And then Fetty was traded away, and Crochet was reduced to pitching like 60 or 70 pitches a game. So you'd get these weird box scores where he'd go like 3 2/3 innings and have 8 strikeouts and just be removed. So, going forward, we acquired a new manager. And so I think people like that hire, but yeah, short term, it's hard to see whatever's going to happen. Whatever's going on with the White Sox is definitely long term, and the best we can look at is some of the other hires being made in the offense. I mean, in the front office, including adding last year they got Brian Bannister to come over as a pitching guru who's been very respected and very helpful. They made a similar acquisition this year on the hitting side of someone who's respected, who's not going to be the hitting coach, but will be behind the scenes with the system. And you can look for them to during the offseason be trading Garrett Crochet. I think that's the biggest thing that's very clear. Crochet will probably be traded. And long term, I get the feeling, until the team is sold, we might be in this state for a while, and it might be a while until the team is sold. So that's all I've got to say. Like,
Okay, so thank you. I have to say this is the first time I've ever set a timer on my phone during the meeting to time the presentations. And this is the time that everyone finished short. I mean, I don't think anyone even ran 4 minutes, and I allocated 5. Well, thank you. I appreciate everybody. This is I believe the highest attendance we've had in any of these meetings. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. Um, so we're going to open it up to everyone to comment. Um, I'd like to ask Richard about Chicago. Do you think there's a chance the White Sox would get their ballpark proposal before Reinsdorf sells?
no,
Yeah, that
I,
was
I
my.
don't think the finances are that good. I think you might have heard, what was it, about a month and a half ago, there was a rumor that uh, Reinsdorf was interested in selling the team. It came out and it kind of disappeared, but it was like for about a day or two, it was really big news. Oh, there's a rumor going around. Reinsdorf's going to sell it, is interested in selling the team. But then it just became too specific. It was like he was specifically going to sell the team to a group of investors led by Dave Stewart, former MLB pitcher Dave Stewart. And when you realize that Dave Stewart is publicly the head of the project to move baseball to Nashville, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, well, if he was really trying to sell the team, he wouldn't just keep it to one bidder. So this is a leverage play. And I think the press figured it out pretty quickly that this was an attempt to get leverage, that this leak probably came from the White Sox with the intent of putting pressure on the state legislature or whatever to maybe cough up money to get a site. But the Chicago Bears also want a new site, and there's a lot of pressure being put on public offices, and they're just not. We have enough other issues, and even like the city today or tomorrow is going through a vote on will property taxes be increased to balance off our debts and budget. And so I just don't think anybody around here is in the mood to be investing, in a public stadium. I just don't think it's going to happen. So I think he's trying, but at some point, I I doubt it.
We're actually seeing the same thing in Cleveland with the football stadium. The Haslams are agitating for a new stadium out in Brook Park, and you're seeing that same kind of thing. There's always one very important lesson, be it sports media, be it political media. If you get a story out with an anonymous source, that means that it is information that somebody wants out, and you need to figure out who and why. And like you said, it sounds like the Chicago media saw right through what was going on there.
Okay, Stu had his hand up, and he's
Yeah.
been patiently waiting. So Stu,
Yeah.
you want to chip in?
Yeah, the interesting thing with the Twins this year is how well or how poorly they turn their fans off from before the season. And then it just mounted when they did their collapse later on. And trade deadline, they got Trevor Richards. They had the TV problems and were off regular cable for a while. There was a person, I think, near the end of the regular season, he comes in to be the Fox or ESPN person, and I won't say his name, but a really pretty well-known person in town with a long PR history. And he said that he considers this like one of the top or bottom 5 of PR moves, going back to when Joe Polat just came out and said, well, our TV deal is gone, so we're gonna cut payroll. And this person, who's a reasonable person, he's not the knee-jerk type, he's not the kind of person who when they fired Billy Martin said, I'm never going to another game. In fact, he was covering the Twins for the local paper at the time. But he said when his local agent or his Twins ticket agent called, he shares 4-season tickets with some others, and he said this his agent is wonderful, but he said to her, we're not going to get him, and I just want you to know this is just a protest for how the Twins have done everything this year to turn off their fan base. So what that's going to do for next year after a collapse, and now I've just again reading Dave St. Peter's letter as he's stepping down, whether it's entirely of his own volition or not, and then the press release that they sent out about the leadership changes. Of course, the team's now apparently on the market for a new owner too, but Falvey's moving up to do everything now. And they also backfilled the position that Thad Levine had as general manager, and that's Jeremy Zoll has been moved into that. So they're still going to have that with Falvey running the overall show, with having the general manager. I don't know how many baseball teams do that. I'm more used to it in football. When a guy like Bill Parcells, you want to get him to come to your team, well, you've got to give him total control of everything there is. And is that common that somebody takes on the what Dave St. Peter did with the business side of it, that includes all the TV negotiations, stuff like that, and then runs baseball operations? Is that common in baseball as I've seen it in football?
Well, I don't track the NFL except for the business very much, but I think it's more common in football where people are given absolute control. I mean, of course, when you have absolute control, really a lot of what a GM would be doing is done by your assistant. So how well you operate with someone in absolute control depends on how good the assistants they hire are, because somebody's got to do the work. A person can't do three jobs at once, and they end up, delegating a lot of stuff, and that's an important part of it that we don't see. But maybe I'm wrong. Anyone else want to opine about answer Stu's question before we go to Joe Shaw? Okay, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I just wanted to ask Richard a question. You talked a little bit about, the public and private ownership churn. Richard, do you think there's any kind of a reasonable probability that the White Sox could actually leave Chicago and go someplace south like Nashville?
Well, I think there's a chance. I think it just depends on who buys the team. And I don't know, like I don't know how attractive the White Sox are as a market to somebody else who wants to come in here. It depends on what their reason for buying the team is and where what their purpose is. If it's something that like, oh, it's a local investment group that wants to keep the team here, then no, it won't be moved. If it's an outsider, they still might see possibilities and maybe a place for a new park or something. Maybe they have better relations and are willing to put up more money, to build a new park, and maybe that would convince the state to. I mean, I think there's still a lot the state and the city that can do that don't necessarily have to be strictly putting money into it. I mean, I think they can ease regulations and ease with infrastructure. I think there are things they can do that are independent just of money, and maybe some other owner might have a better relationship in getting that desired location placed. But definitely, if you get an outside investor, who knows, they might decide, hey, that's what they want to do. They might want to move it to Nashville, or the other place I keep hearing possibly would be like Salt Lake or something like that. That team's primed for getting baseball.
Okay.
And so we'll see. I wouldn't count it out. And the I know the fans like to boo the owner and that, but the display put on like at the last series in the ballpark, you know, I don't know if anybody outside would look and say, "Oh, that's appealing. I want to move there," where those fans are there just yelling at their team, submitting anti-Semitic slurs. When I was in the ballpark, I was hearing that. I mean, I don't like, there's like an anger there that like I could just as easily say somebody coming in and thinking, I'd get a more friendly reception somewhere else. So,
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing.
yeah.
Of course, a more friendly reception also means higher prices. Someone might look at the White Sox as a distressed asset that they could buy relatively cheaply and then with good management make a handsome profit. But I don't know. I mean, there's so few teams up for sale, and the White Sox are certainly in a pickle. I mean, Reinsdorf chose to announce he needed a new ballpark. Of course, what was really driving him was the lease on guaranteed rate field, right? But once the Bears were in the market looking for a new place and asking the city and the state to hand over $1 billion or $2 billion, I think it was what, $1.5 billion total, but I lost track of it. The White Sox are going to be hard pressed to get anyone to give them much money. So, okay, so we're
Not a
having
good scene. Not a good scene.
yeah, we're having a chat here in the chat about Billy Martin. Dan, you started your career in Chicago in the early 80s, right?
That's the rumor.
The rumor. Yeah.
I still want
And
you to write your memoirs one day.
I'm going to have to be completely out of the game to do that.
Because you'd never get back in? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't think the door would open very large for me if I wrote what I really wanted to write.
were you still with the White Sox when we went through the Gold Coast Sox or the Gold Sox and the move to St. Pete?
Yeah, that was one of my first years. That was 86. Good year to pick to get married, hire a broadcaster as a GM and then move at the end of the year. Some real stability there for me at 25 years of age. But yeah, I was there.
Weren't you the one that was responsible for Disco Demolition Night too? Did I read that correctly in history?
No, I was there though. I was there with my dad. We were there, and my father. We were sitting in the left field stands, folks. And when people started crawling down the foul pole in the seventh inning, my dad, the absolute massive White Sox fan that he was, said, "We're leaving." And my brother and I were like, "Why?" And he said, "That's why." And he pointed up, and there was a guy going down the darn foul pole. And I think, having worked there for a long time, people didn't realize the foul poles were beveled because the upper deck was built after the lower deck. So let's just say, not a real good move by whoever did that. And my father, till the day he passed, just said that was one of his great life decisions to get the hell out of the ballpark that night.
I did the story on the 50th anniversary of 10 Cent Beer Night in Cleveland this year, and there was an element of self-selection there too. I talked to a lot of people who said, who looked around and saw the way things were going and said, we should leave. And so it was the people who were incapable of good decisions who were still there at the end.
Yeah, no, not good. Hey, I just want to say to everybody, great work getting this many people on a midweek virtual in the middle of November. Just as a member, it's wonderful, and as a board of director, I just smile that you guys were able to put this together. I think this is awesome, and my dog wants to go outside for a walk, but I just said, nah, we're not going until we chat a little bit more ball here.
Yeah, we haven't tried really the weekend meetings other than Sunday night. We haven't tried. I sometimes think that a Saturday morning, like 11 to 1 slot might work. But so far, we're doing pretty well in the weeknight slots and the Sunday night slot.
Yeah,
So,
Wymuck was a success.
yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Dan, for the reminiscence. I have to say that in Detroit, Disco Demolition Night is constantly regurgitated. I mean, constantly, because of course the Tigers were the opponents.
Mhm.
It's hard for me to imagine the chaos, and it's also hard for me to imagine that um, Mike Vack is proud of it. I mean, I listened to him speak at the SABR convention in 23 in Chicago. I thought he was, smiling like the cat who caught the canary about the whole thing. Does anyone think I'm wrong on that?
No, I agree.
No, I don't. He kind of claimed that that was the down part of his life, and that somehow eventually it came around to see it as a point of pride, and
Yeah.
I think that might be the case with a lot of that kind of stuff with him.
Yeah, well, I mean, he certainly has a lot of big stones, and his marketing ideas are just, a lot of them are just genius. Um, okay, so we're also having discussion about expansion sites because Nashville was brought up. I see that people are talking about Salt Lake, which is a recent entrant in the gossip mill. I don't take Salt Lake seriously because I think it's too small of a market. I would think Charlotte would get a lot better, would look a lot better, except that I do know from living in North Carolina, albeit a while back, that I don't think there's going to be a lot of money for a baseball team in Charlotte because they've spent a lot of money on the NFL and the NBA and on NASCAR. But, it's not impossible. Charlotte is got somewhat of inferiority complex as a major city with a huge amount of corporate headquarters and yet they don't get the national attention I think they deserve. Certainly not the national attention they think they deserve. Um, but Nashville is the darling. Maybe Dave Dombrowski, when he gets fired by the Phillies, will go back to Nashville. So, all right. So next up, someone have a topic they want to discuss or question? Francis, are you raising your
Francis.
hand?
Yes, I did. I was trying to figure out my computer for a moment here. I just add one thing to what you said about Charlotte. I live about 100 miles from there,
Oh, that's right. Yeah, of course.
and it's right there on I-85. So I think there could be a factor on weekend games at least too, because there are a lot of Brave fans who go down to Atlanta and have for years from the Charlotte area or even north of Charlotte. I've done that back in the day myself. And so I think it might be a factor there where some prospective owner would say on weekends, at least when there's a 3-game series in Atlanta, there's a loyalty to the Braves.
Yeah, I think North Carolina is a great sports state. I mean, there's such a rich amount of sports, especially college and pro. It's just that I think baseball is sort of like fifth or sixth after NFL, NBA, NASCAR, college football, college basketball. Maybe you could argue it's more popular than college football there, but I wouldn't want to bet on it.
How about
Plus,
hockey? And they got hockey in Charlotte too.
uh, not in Charlotte, right? In Raleigh?
Is
there?
that? Oh, okay. Carolina, or okay, I didn't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the Hurricanes. Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's enough of a factor that when you mentioned a few minutes ago, Gary, about having SABR meetings, these Zoom meetings on Saturday morning or mid-hour, midday on Saturday. I'm thinking in the fall, a lot of people around here are more interested in college football.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about that, but I mean, I just follow, the 19th Century Committee and a lot of webinars, and a lot of them schedule webinars at noon or 1 Eastern time on Saturdays.
Oh, yes.
It
I'm
might,
not putting up any kind of, argument for not doing that, but it might, and of course, it just might draw a few people away in this
oh yeah,
particular area because there is
sure,
a
sure.
lot of college followers, and even on a Saturday, people who go to games and tailgate, so they'd be leaving early.
Yeah. So Dan Evans has said in the chat that he favors Portland and Nashville. I used to think Portland would be a great expansion site, but it doesn't seem to be a huge appetite there. Dan, what do you know that we don't?
Well, there's a lot of civic interest, and they've done a lot of work in the community to really put themselves in a good position. I think they and Nashville and Salt Lake City have the best infrastructure, and that's what Major League Baseball looks for when they start to assemble. I mean, obviously it's a huge dollar commitment, but it also is a strategic commitment within the community. And Portland's done some really great things in the community to get the land and be prepared for the inevitable round of expansion.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't diss them, and I always thought they'd be a great city. I just after they lost AAA and didn't seem to care, I wondered if there was much of a if it wasn't just there wasn't enough of a demand. Although it helps that there's no NFL team there, right? So that helps because that clears space in the civic treasury and in the treasury or in the minds of the pockets of rich investors who you need to be able to afford expansion these days. So,
Does it matter that they're 150 miles from Seattle, and for that matter, that's about what Charlotte is to Atlanta, is that right? I mean, that's getting a little close unless you've got huge population.
well, I mean, unless you're within what they used to call the circuit and the league rules of another club, they can't stop you. What really is a
No,
lobbying thing.
no,
You have to get enough owners to agree to try to block it.
no,
I don't see
I'm
Seattle having that much influence.
no, I'm not talking about that, but just is it a wise move if you've got a team 150 miles isn't that far for fighting for fans and TV and all of that. I mean, the chances for success. That's what I'm asking about with that.
Well, I think that I mean almost every expansion site except Salt Lake is close to somebody, right? Nashville isn't that far from Cincinnati and
Okay. Thinking a little bit more than 150 miles, but
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
I agree. Gene says Charlotte's 250 miles from Atlanta.
Okay. But Portland is about 150 from Seattle, and
Yeah, I mean, I don't I think Dan pointed out that MLB looks at different factors than we're looking at because I think under any objective factor, Las Vegas is not a good site for a major league team, especially when you're coming in there after the NFL and the NHL and the NBA may be primed to move there and they've got a WNBA team. I can't see that's a good place, but the Athletics were desperate. They didn't have any leverage and they sort of trashed their own home. But of course, everyone thinks the expansion to Tampa Bay was a mistake. Not everyone, I guess. I didn't think it was a mistake then, and I think that it's still a good site. Although now I just saw the estimate today of 56 or $57 million to repair the
Yep.
dome, and it would take a year, which
Yep.
means you're theoretically spending that amount of money minus the insurance. I guess there's $25 million in insurance. You're spending 30 some $1 million, assuming that's actually accurate and doesn't go up, to put the team in that place for 2 years. But the deal is now in jeopardy because there are two new county commissioners who may not be supportive of the bond issue that the county needs to issue to finance the deal. So the Rays are back in, I wouldn't say limbo, but certainly uncertainty. The hurricane blow was unexpected for sure. But one of the reasons they didn't move, of course, is that there aren't a lot of good sites, and a lot of places would rather have their own team than a refugee team. I think that's true. Although, since you can't guarantee, I'm sure like Nashville would take a refugee team if they could. Even the White Sox were, So I have talked too long. Roger, are you putting your hand up or are you just adjusting your camera? Okay. So we have yeah, we have the chat talking about expansion. Somebody asked a question in the chat a little bit ago about prospects. And that's something we could do is talk about each team situation with prospects. We haven't talked about free agents, which I think is really unusual. Rogelio mentioned Scott Boris's advice to the Tigers. Should I characterize it that? Or
Yeah,
did he?
I would say, yeah, the classic Borisism, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Well,
he's on his revenge tour this winter, right? He's
Yeah.
going to make up for last year.
yeah, and he's certainly a big force. I remember that when I first learned that he had more people working for him than a half dozen teams' front offices. Now that was a few years back. I don't think that'd be true now, but I'm not sure. So Chris wants to know what Scott told the Tigers. Rogelio, you want to answer that?
Basically, that the offer that they gave for Scooble wasn't market value, and essentially that it wasn't good enough an offer. It wasn't marketable. It wasn't to the Tigers, which what is fair for currently in the market right now, and that they kind of lowballed them. So essentially, you putting the word back out there that Chris Hill is just not going to spend. And so when Evan Betzel of the Free reported that a little bit, that was kind of the way it was spun, and so everybody on social media kind of ran with it. So, but I think it's a lot of posturing right now. But at the same time, it doesn't look good for the Tigers in that sense because they have had they're already kind of backpedaling a little bit about not spending on Alex Bergman, but again, he's also coming off surgery, so I'm not sure exactly if that's going to be a good idea either, despite him being a plus locker room presence. But yeah, there's just I think the Tigers are going. There's been talk about Nick Pivetta, the Boston Red Sox reliever or starter rather, they have interest in. Alex Baum, who the Phillies are trading for after coming off a 3-war season as a potential the Tigers. But the Tigers do need. I think they're a team that are going to be like Cleveland in a sense of just they're going to promote within, maybe spend every once in a great while. I don't think the Tigers are going to be the days of the wild spenders like that people want them to be.
Like
Yeah.
when they got Baez.
Yeah, and that's in that in the bias situation too. Like it's I like just being down there. Like, look, Javier Baez knows that he's struggling. He knows that, and the fact that some of the fans have kind of unnecessarily piled on him. He's been terrible, but that's what you expected when he is a guy who's been. If you look at his peripheral numbers, that's who he was. He was a wild swinger. So I don't understand where fans were just like, oh, this is what he expected. Cubs fans knew that too as well. The team, by the way, that is on my hat is the Havana Sugar Kings, which was the last international team in Cuba. They were an international league team, a AAA affiliate, I believe, of the Reds until '59. And then Fidel Castro was like, nope, we're going to stop that. And then moved to Jersey City.
Yeah.
So,
Tom Bubluski, who's from the Toledo chapter, asked about the Tigers' TV situation, I think. And I would just say that it's unclear the Tigers are one of the clubs that have not announced they're making a cut rate deal with Diamond Sports Group. And they also haven't committed to go with MLB yet, although they may be forced to go with MLB if the judge does not approve of Diamond Sports Group reorganization. And I don't know how to handicap that. And Richard, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I put it up when I thought we were going to start talking about David's question about the prospects.
We can
But
let's talk about prospects.
I could do that for just for the White Sox. What I think what'll happen is, in addition to some of the guys they brought up last year, I would imagine of the players who haven't already come up, that you would see maybe even at the start of the year, the catcher Edgar Caro, who's really like one of their top 5 prospects, and maybe at the moment their, best position player prospect who's been developing through the system. They got him in a trade last year in 2023 during the trading deadline for from the Angels, I want to say, for Lance Lynn. And he's been fine. He's been hitting. He came up, he was at AA this year, he was at AAA, and he looks ready. And so I get the feeling he's going to have a shot to at least make the team in some capacity out of spring training. And the other one is the White Sox best prospect, a left-handed pitcher named Noah Schultz, has been developing. And I don't know if you'll see him out the get-go, but I would bet he'd be up at some point during the year because he's been progressing nicely as well. So those are 2 names on the White Sox side. Let other people deal with the other teams.
Well, let's go down the list the same way we did the initial. Roger, you want to talk about the Royals prospects? You don't unmute yourself, Roger.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you. Good.
Okay. The main prospect probably right now is Jack Cafiglione, the Florida standout, and Carter Jansen, the catcher. Jansen was did very well in the AFL season so far, but when you've got the potential Hall of Famer and Salvador Perez and Freddie Fermin, who's probably one of the best catchers and throwing out runners, it's kind of a stagnated position for Jansen. Cafiglione may come up late this year or next year, just depends on what the Royals free agents will be. I mean, with veterans like DeJong and Hampson going to free agency, you might tend to think that they may go to greener pastures after this year. Pitching, there are really no pitching prospects right now. The top 5 look pretty solid for the Royals. Maybe we'll trade some veterans, to get a better minor league system.
Okay, so Tigers, I will make an editorial comment, then I'll let the Tigers minor league report. Tigers have a lot of high-level talent concentrated in some really, really good prospects. I'm not convinced they have enough depth yet, but Harris and Ryan Garco and the whole host of people that Harris hired since he moved it to Detroit are working on that. But Rogelio, you want to talk specifically about Clark and McGonigal and a few others?
Yeah, so we are rolling currently right now on our website the a hitting series. So we're actually doing a podcast this evening talking about the best hitters in the system. And Kevin McGonigal was on fire until his hand injury, and he's a guy who could, I think, long term will be at second base, but he played primarily short. Very good hitting tool. His walk rate was ridiculous. You have to keep in mind too that in single A, the Florida State League was kind of a weird league, but he still nevertheless was very productive. And Max Clark, a guy who I really like a lot because he just takes the ball the opposite way and he just does a lot of the little things you like as a hitter, and started off really well in the Midwestern League. Jose Briseño right now is a triple crown candidate in the Arizona Fall League. Him and Theron Lazone today went 9 for 10. 9 for 10 tonight in the Arizona Fall League, and he's almost batting. Briseño is almost batting 500. It's ridiculous, and some of the numbers he's put up this year in the Arizona Fall League. But he was off to a good start before an injury, and he's a guy who I'm really interested to see what will happen in the Midwest League because that's such a tough league to do to hit in, especially for power. Zayon, what helps about Zayon is that he's a switch hitter who they picked up in the Dodgers deal, and he's a very good catcher. Well, excuse me, I shouldn't say good catcher. He's got some work to do as a catcher, but between him and Basenio, you got two really good barrel who make really good contact with that. The Tigers system right now, honestly, is little, as Gary mentioned, not as deep as it in terms of like from a AA, AAA standpoint. Andrew Navigato, who's kind of really at this point kind of graduated from prospect class, 26, 27 years old, had a really good year last year in Toledo, but if he was the Tigers shortstop, he would have gotten some consideration, and he didn't. A couple guys to look out for that will probably make a in terms of you'll see more of them this year. Bryce Rayner, who was their first round draft pick, 19-year-old kid, is already in the top 5 among prospects in the Tiger system. Hayu Lee is another guy who they picked up in a trade with the Phillies and the Michael Lorenzen deal. Really like him a lot. Power bat. Can also play third. He's still got some work to do at third, but he missed some time due to a back injury. So as far as like AA goes, he would probably be the closest thing. I know that Harris is a big fan of him and his potential. Pitching wise, a really good year for Jaden Ham, Midwest Pitcher of the Year. Guy who's 22 years old, good mix of a fastball, 92, 93, but he's got a lot of movement on it. He's got a nice delivery. Big fan of him, and I think we'll be interested to see how he does at the next level. And the international guys have been coming through a little bit too. I mentioned Masinho, Framber Montalia, who had a really good year in the Complex League and then has strong postseason for Lakeland, is another guy to look out for. So between him, I would say Enrique Jimenez to another catcher. The Tigers have some good depth in the lower minors. Carson Rucker, who's set to come back, is also going to hopefully make an impact this year as well.
Okay, thanks, Rogelio. So the Twins.
Oh, yes. The Twins, I don't have it here in front of me, but the Twins, due to the fact that they graduated several of their best prospects this year and toward the end of last year, such as Brooks Lee, Royce Lewis, the pitcher Simeon Woods Richardson, Louis Varland, Bailey Olber. These people have entered the majors. I think maybe the prospect label should go to Walker Jenkins, the #1 pick from just either last year or the year before. But the Twins, they have a pretty young roster. Just in my own head, calculating it, they have to have a pretty young roster average wise because they don't have a real big free agent, veteran free agent roster. So I would have to think that their prospects are probably already on the squad in terms of having a year under their belts, and they're hoping and praying that next year they can really blossom. But Walker Jenkins, I think, is the #1 prospect.
Don't forget Matt Wallner.
Yeah, but Matt Wallner, yeah, he played a lot this year. Also,
Emma Rodriguez, I want to
Who?
say. Emmanuel
Oh, Emmanuel. Okay.
Rodriguez.
Yeah, the outfielder, right? Mm-hmm.
And Deshaun Kersey, to a certain extent, he got a little MLB time last year, but he could be something. Back up to Buxton.
Well, it's fun that we can go drive 10 miles and see their prospects too. So, many of those guys that you just mentioned, Gene, Wallner and Kiersey and Lee and Richardson. Yeah, it's kind of fun for us.
Also, don't forget people like CJ Culpepper and Kayleen Culpepper, who were CJ Culpepper, the pitcher, made it all the way up to St. Paul this year after starting in Cedar Rapids. That's Kayleen Culpepper, the infield first round pick. He's running he in the Midwest League this year. He looked pretty good.
Yeah, the kid out of K-State. I like that kid a lot. That was a good pick by the Twins.
Okay, do we cover all the teams? Everyone have their say?
No,
Who said no?
Vince, Cleveland.
yes,
Oh,
right.
Vince, I'm sorry.
The Guardians had the first pick in the Major League Baseball draft this year, drafted Travis Bazzana. Obviously, he is not a pro-ready prospect at this point. He was in the A-ball team in Lake County. We're actually a little confused by that because the Guardians seem to really be attached to middle infielders that never seem to find their way onto the parent club with any due speed. We saw Kyle Manzardo this year. He was a minor leaguer last year when the Guardians got him in the um, Aaron Savali trade. He came up once in the spring and did not really impress anybody. Came up again late summer and acquitted himself far better. I think the prospect that everybody is really interested in the short term is Chase DeLauder, and he actually got a spring training invitation last year, and he acquitted himself reasonably well, not well enough to break camp with the team, but I think that that's the guy that everybody wants to see make his debut next year.
Okay, thank you, Vince. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you. I just wasn't keeping track on my notepad here about who had spoken.
You have offended my delicate sensibilities.
Um, okay, if anyone wants to chime in about prospects, please do. If not, I want to talk about the World Series because I'm a bit
I have a
surprised.
question for, sorry, Gary, if I could just jump in.
Yeah, jump in, jump in.
I had a question for Rogelio because I don't think you mentioned and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but the catcher first baseman that the Tigers got in the Flaherty deal.
Oh, Theron. Yeah, Theron.
Yeah, him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. With
What do you think of
Briseño.
him?
I like him. I know that it was interesting the night and day in terms of his numbers with Great Lakes before with the Dodger system before he came over here. The fact that I will say that talking to Brian Pena, who's the Tigers catching coordinator, one of the things he does have to work on a little bit of is his side to side game in terms of as a catcher. He has been working on becoming a better framer. He's got a really good arm, but the problem is just he kind of it's just going back and forth and blocking the ball a little bit. He struggles with that, and so I like his work ethic. He's the ability to put a lot into what he's doing right now to become a better player. But I love the line drive swing. Kind of reminds me of Kendrys Morales, the former Royal. Kind of the same kind of swing, kind of same load setup. I had a listener point that out on our podcast, and in looking back, it's dead on, especially kind of the way he follows through in the box. And so I'm a big fan. I think the Tigers. It was reported the Tigers were interested in somebody else, and this was kind of like a last minute addition. But the Tigers did their homework on this, and they did a really good job of identifying a player who I think has big power potential, but it has a really good line drive kind of swing, and I think that's gonna translate well into the gaps over at Comerica Park.
Yeah, and the beauty of him as well as he can solve two potential problems for the Tigers. One is the complete lack of offense at catcher, which, right now is not a huge issue, but the Tigers aren't scoring enough runs. That's one of the positions they can improve at. And if he can't catch, he could be the solution to Spencer Torkelson if Torkelson doesn't, improve from his performance in 24. I think the minimum performance the Tigers expect out of Torkelson is his 2023 performance, which wasn't all that good overall, but was encouraging because of the last half of the season where he really pasted the ball. But they're clearly preparing for a non-Torkelson future, and he's one of the options they would have if Lorenzo can't handle catching defensively. So it was a really master stroke to get him. Whether he was intended to be, whether they went after him to start or not, it was a great great thing to get him.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Especially the Tigers' lack of depth and catcher right now in the system it was pretty barren this year.
Yeah, Rogelio, you may know this, but do you think the Tigers were disappointed in Dingler, or do you think they sort of expected that he wasn't going to be able to hit at the major league level?
I think they sort of expected it. I think they recognize the fact that he is a guy who is going to struggle catching up because this is when he was at Double A, his first year at Double A, had a hard time adjusting, and I know catchers take a while to adjust, but they knew that he had the defensive tools to do it, and I think they were okay with it because the difference between him calling a game and any other catcher that they had in Erie at the time, they were willing to have this put up with the offensive struggles. And so once he started really hitting the ball with velocity in Toledo, that's when they say like that's where I think he turned the corner a little bit because every there's a lot of balls over 100 plus miles an hour. I know that's not everything, but the fact that he was actually able to center cut fastballs better really helped his cause. And at the major league level right now, I think they're willing to. I think they're still going to get a veteran catcher. I'm not sure if they're exactly sold on him, but they know that his bat's going to still take some time at the big league level to adjust.
Yeah, well, as I said, they could afford to have catchers who aren't producing offensively if they had better offense around the horn. But we'll see. Okay. If anyone wants to chime in about prospects, please do. Otherwise, I would like to talk about the World Series because it's a bit surprising to me that we haven't talked about it at all. I mean, there was one comment earlier, but considering how much attention it got, partly because of the international attention in Japan, but also because of the two huge markets and the two huge players. I mean, the two biggest players in the game, right? Judge and Otani. Do people feel like I do that we were, I don't want to say cheated. Rogelio, thanks if you're signing off. Take care. We were cheated of the World Series, but I don't think we got a really good one. I mean, all World Series are a crapshoot. One team can collapse, one team can overachieve, but this case, I expected more, and I was disappointed.
Well, there were some entertaining games. Definitely the ending of game one, and even sloppy baseball is entertaining. And that fifth inning in game five was as ugly an inning as you'll have in the history of baseball, which could have made it a pretty entertaining thing if the Yankees would have taken it to LA and long odds, but needed two there. But the one thing for me, and I'm a Yankee fan too, so watch that meltdown. Of course, the biggest thing is Cole after he gets two strikeouts after the two errors, doesn't cover first. And I don't know if anybody else has heard or if anybody has said to put any blame on Anthony Rizzo for that. I've heard people say, well, why didn't Rizzo try to run for first? Well, because by the time he looked up and saw that Cole wasn't there, it was too late. Everything Rizzo did on that play was fine. He didn't charge in on the ball, which even did change direction a little bit. If you charge in and scoop, anything that goes wrong, you're going to muff it. I mean, I called an error this year on Jose Miranda at third, who for no good reason tried to come in on a ball and scoop it, took a little bit of a funny hop, and I called it an error, and then the batter wanted to hit because of the bad hop. Rizzo could see that was a tricky ball. He played back to make sure he corralled it. He came up ready to throw to first, and there was nothing else he could do. And he had every reason in the world to believe that Garrett Cole would have been on his way to first base. So I don't know if anybody else has heard Rizzo. I'm not a big Rizzo defender, but on that one, he had no fault in that play.
I didn't hear any criticism of Rizzo, and I think it would be unjustified. I was listening to the Yankees radio feed in Game 5, at least at that point. I like to switch the feeds and get different perspectives, and Sterling was apoplectic.
About Cole?
Well, about the Yankees in
Oh,
general.
yeah.
And I can't remember all of his comments, but at one point he said the Yankees ran the bases like they were drunk or like drunks. And
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the post game, he and Susan Waldman were, I mean, it was really refreshing to hear radio crew be that candid. But of course, Sterling, what can they do? Send him to retirement? And it was interesting to listen to him. Of course, part of that is the Yankees have this sense of entitlement that makes it even more bitter that they act like a club that's not used to being in the postseason. But yeah, I didn't see any uh, that play with Cole. It just mystifies me. I said on a local radio show after the series that if that were a marginal major league pitcher who did that, he probably ended his career or guaranteed he would be a quad A player for the rest of his career. Of course, Cole can't with his stature. That's not true, but completely mystified me because there was absolutely no excuse. There's no way to parse it. Um, and
Well,
I didn't hear
Yeah.
anyone defending him, although
I,
because he's such a
I
huge talent, there
let me
were
just throw in one more thing and I head up the butt. And it didn't cost him, but later in the game when Luke Weaver disengaged for the third time with this lollipop pickoff throw to first. Um, that was in the eighth inning, and it was after the Dodgers had taken the lead. It had no effect on the game, but he's made two pickoff throws, and then he turns, not because he thinks he's got a shot at getting the runner, turns and throws to first, and didn't cost him anything. But geez, you're in the frickin' World Series and you get your head up your ass that many times. Focus a little bit.
right, and
Yeah.
that is one of the key differences between a player who has talent but can't cope at the major league level is ability to concentrate.
And that was one of the things, I think it was the Athletic that mentioned that they said that the Dodgers scouting report on the Yankees was that, yeah, they had a lot of skills, but they were sloppy defensively, they were sloppy running the bases, and those were things that could be and as it turns out were exploited.
Yep.
Yeah. Francis, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I do it. I think the most stunning thing about it for me, or one of them, things was that it was the Yankees. Because I watched a lot of baseball on the Yankees this year on television, and it it's just surprised me that a team that I don't think was that terrible defensively during the season. I may be wrong. Somebody may correct me on that, but to expect it was just totally unexpected that they would come up with an inning like that. I mean, it was surprising that any major league team that got to the World Series would, but the Yankees had been in so many high profile games to just fall apart in one inning, and really through the series, with if you include base running and so forth. They just played like a team that they had not played like all year, I thought. And I'm not a Yankees fan, but at any rate, it was that made it even more surprising to me. If it had been some team that perhaps had not been in the World Series a long time, didn't have a lot of experienced players, um, it wouldn't have caught me by as much surprise. But I sat there like everybody else, I guess, who was watching it and saying, "Can't believe this."
Francis, I have a question. Did you hear the rumor that Aaron Judge was chosen to drop the ball on New Year's Eve?
Okay, knock that off. That was another lack of focus,
Oh, yeah.
obviously, for
Yeah.
no good reason. He's looking at the runner on first, who's not going to he's not going to double off. Just another lack of focus on a routine one, and where he shouldn't have just catch the ball. We're up by 5 runs. And I'm not going to double this guy off, and then that opens it up.
Well, I want to
Yeah.
direct everyone's attention to the chat room where the only major league GM in the chat and the Zoom, as opposed to all of us armchair GMs, has commented on the Dodgers scouting report on the Yankees as talent greater than fundamentals, and that's a 3-word or 2 words and a symbol summary of the way the Yankees played, right?
Well, Danny, you saying that still even with the lack of fundamentals and breakdown, I mean, that gets into Leo DeRocher. Yeah, you're nice guys, and all these teams want to talk about their great culture, but still got to have talent, right?
Stewie, you do, but it's so hard to win against an elite team like the Dodgers. And you give them 4 mistakes in 1 inning. I mean, they're going to go for the juggler. I mean, we're a bunch of crazy baseball fans here on this call, and the Dodgers are that 48-year-old guy who's playing in a Friday night game who takes the guy out in the double play. I mean, they play to win, and when you make the lapses that they made, mediocre teams, poor teams don't take advantage of those mistakes. They just don't. That's why they're mediocre. But down 5-0, I think a lot of people thought that game was over. And with the absolute craziness of that 5th inning, I mean, has anyone ever seen a game change more in the postseason? I mean, I've heard people talk about the 60 World Series 7th game, but that was a great ball game. There were no strikeouts in that ball game. It was an elite game. This was a team with self-inflicted wounds that, a lot of talent, but talent sometimes isn't enough. You got to know how to play the game. And it's really disappointing to watch such an elite group of players just self-destruct.
Well, how much of the jugular did the Dodgers go for in that inning? Because they got single, 2 errors, bases loaded, nobody out, 2 strikeouts, and then a routine that took another bad mistake. I mean, they could have been out of that. Cole could have looked awesome. Like he just really saved Volpe and Judge.
Stewie, I thought their base running was outstanding. They took 2 extra bases in that inning, and I would say 95% of the players in the game on the ground ball to Rizzo by Betts wouldn't have run the way Betts did.
Well, okay, good for Betts, but that's still that's still they came that close to not capitalizing on 2 errors and the bases loaded, nobody out situation. It just worked. They got 1 more break in there. Good for them. Then they got the hits after that. Good for them. But the whole narrative of that could have been hell of a lot different if Cole had covered the base.
Yeah, I think the key to that game was Roberts and his elite managing in a bullpen game effectively. I mean, Flaherty, imploded and down 5-0, and I bet all of us were watching the game. And you could tell from his body language, and I heard from people who are affiliated with the club in the dugout, said that Roberts said, we're going to get runs, guys. We're going to score 4 or 5 runs. Just stay with these guys. And, when you're thinking about, they were going up against Garrett Cole, and Cole twice in that series did not win games where he had big leads. I think that's an extraordinary accomplishment, especially, I mean, listen, it's hard to win a World Series. It's hard to win 11 games. But when you win 11 games with 2.5 starters, that's an extraordinary accomplishment.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Dan, about the managing, because I feel like Roberts does not get his due. Now, he will now because the Dodgers won the World Series, but I don't think that I thought he's been a good manager for years, and yet he gets very little attention for what he's done with the Dodgers because they haven't won a lot. They haven't won many World Series until this is their second, and people discount the one in 2020 because of the short season, but that doesn't affect the postseason play really. It affects the getting into the playoffs. So I hope that people recognize that he is a first-class manager now. So Richard, you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is, partially thought that really not so much the World Series, but it was almost like it was decided. The deciding series of the playoffs was the Dodgers Padres, and what amazed me was more than the Dodgers World Series, but already that comeback had been exhibited in the series against the Padres because they looked dead. They looked like, the Padres were hitting him, and they had that big lead in game 3, and then they didn't score the rest of it, but they had a big lead. So you figure, okay, who cares? They won. All they need is one more game. They're playing at home. The Dodgers are forced into a bullpen game where the bullpen hadn't been that sharp. And I mean, that game 4 of that series just blew me away in terms of, that all of a sudden the Padres decide, oh, our season's over, the bats go to sleep, and the Dodgers pitch great. And that was like, I mean, I part of me suspects those were the best two teams, the Dodgers and the Padres, by the end of the year. That was the series that decided it. Because I thought there were a few this year. I thought there were a few of the NL teams that would have beaten whoever came out of the AL. Me personally.
Alan says bullpen games should be outlawed. Lots of luck with that. Francis, you still have something to say?
Yeah. One more comment. I was struck by something that I believe John Smoltz may have said on the telecast earlier in the series, but moving back from the 5th game fiasco, I thought it was very unusual in that the of all positions, the defensiveness or the defensive performance of Soto in right field as opposed to Betts in right field. There were several points where Betts made great plays and several instances where Soto did not. And even got, I remember one ball was hit down the right field line, really looked like he might have been able to get to it, but it got by him. And I may be wrong on this, but my recollection is that did he not have one ball that was hit to right field that was just hit a hard grounder out there and it got by him? I thought there was a big difference of all positions that you don't see too often in balls in the series that were hit to right field that Betts would handle and Soto on a couple of occasions did not.
Betts is a shortstop too.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's supposedly going back to the infield next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen anyone as flexible as him. I mean, we see players change positions sometimes because to accommodate somebody else or sometimes because their skills are declining, but typically they don't play both positions or their new position as well, or they weren't playing their old position well, which is why they got moved to a less demanding position. With Betts, it's completely different. I mean, I thought when the Dodgers talked about playing him at shortstop that it was crazy. And then I found out, he is that rare Avis that can do that kind of stuff. He's such a delight to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And most guys who move around, the magnitude of his moves struggle at home plate.
Right.
And instead he flourished, which I think is a real testament to his skill set.
Right. I think that's one of the reasons not to take gamble moving your premium hitting talents around is it could affect their batting. And rarely will the defensive advantage you gain. Now, if a guy has been in a position too long, let's say like Ken Griffey Jr. in center field late in his career, where he clearly needed to move to a corner outfield position. But, to me, you move the marginal talent around, even if that's a stretch to accommodate them, and you leave your premium talent where they are if they can cope defensively. But anyway, so it's 9:24, and we have not talked about next year. So I'd like to take a straw poll. I'm not asking people to predict who's going to win the division, at least not yet. But I would like people to opine as to whether they think their team will be better next year, the same, or worse. So let's take the Guardians. How many
Well,
people?
obviously they won. I believe it was 92 games. Won the division. I can't imagine the only thing they could do is that would be better is a deeper postseason run, and I'm not sure that that is in the cards. Like I said, there are a lot of question marks, surprisingly related to starting pitching. for this team. Bieber is a free agent. Joe and I were at our chapter meeting last week, and we had a guy there from the Plain Dealer, and we said that, you know, and he characterized it as highly unlikely that Bieber would stay in Cleveland. You know, he's a Southern California kind of guy, and that's probably where his fortunes will lead him. Not sure what they're going to do about McKenzie. Not sure what they're going to be able to do with Cobb or Boyd. So, I mean, there are an awful lot of question marks when it comes to starting pitching, which is ironic because that's really been, you know, kind of the girl that brung you to the dance for the last few years. So, I am not sure that they're going to do better. How much worse? I have no idea.
Okay, KC, you want to opine about the improvement or decline next year? Did we lose Roger?
I think KC will be better next year with Jack Taglioni playing.
Yeah, I think they look good next year too. I mean, it's hard not to like that team. Of course, it's hard not to like the Tigers, and actually, I think it's hard not to like the Guardians. I mean, this is such a complete reversal from the way people have viewed the AL Central for years. Um, so I would think the Royals are a good chance to improve next year. And we've lost Rogelio, so I'll speak for the Tigers. I think the Tigers are going to be better in the regular season next year, but I think that they're going to find out that being better in the regular season doesn't necessarily mean you go deeper into the postseason, because the postseason isn't quite a coin toss or a crapshoot, like some people say. Not too far from it. You can run into a club that's not as good as you, that in a short series just gets hot, and all of a sudden it's over, as the Astros found out. I think the Astros are a better team than the Tigers over the season, but the Tigers just buzzsawed through them. And the Tigers could
I
have
said
beaten.
that exactly. I said that the Tigers are very quickly turning into the team that nobody wants to see in the postseason.
Right, right. And the Tigers, you know, they lost the Indians fair and square, or the Indians, the Guardians, and
I
good
still
for,
haven't gotten used to it either.
yeah, good for the Guardians. But the Tigers could have won that series. Not impossible for them to win that series and go to the LCS. So I think next year the challenge will be, once they get into the postseason, getting past the division series. And then we have the Twins. So let's have words of wisdom from the frozen north.
Well, let's see. Do I think they'll be better next year? The Twins have a ton of young players and have a few older guys like Carlos Santana and Max Kepler, but they have a lot of young players, so they still have the potential. So I think they will have a better record than 82 and 80, but I don't know whether it'll be a climb up the standings. And plus, everybody should realize that the AL Central Division teams benefited greatly by playing the White Sox this year, because they were below 500. Cumulatively, they were below 500 against everybody else, but they were 53 and 2 against the White Sox or something like that. So the White Sox have to show up next year. But I think the Twins might do a little better than 82 and 80 because they have a young team.
I think the Twins will probably be better and have a chance at the playoffs. And you know what some of you have been saying here, and Gary, on the one hand, I share your philosophy. The playoffs are a crapshoot. 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 7. Uh, it's and this is why this, out of the 29 years since they went to wild card, this is only the 11th time I think that the team with the best record in each league has met in the World Series, and that's about what I would expect. Uh, Dan, you mentioned the Dodgers won 11 games with 2.5 pitchers. Um, I when I hear people say, "Gee, I think they can make it, but I don't think they can do a big playoff run," the bigger thing is, can they make it? That's 162 games, and once in there, anybody could do it. Michael Rand is a local columnist for the Tribune. 98% of the time, I think he's got great stuff and is really insightful. But he just recently had a column just saying that the Twins aren't made to be able to win in the playoffs. Well, I mean, they haven't in a long time. We know that. but just getting in there, 87. If you talk to the mood of the fans that year, hey, yeah, nice, we made the playoffs, but we're not going to have a chance in the postseason. Flip a coin. I say on every damn series there is, and maybe weight it a little bit for one team over another, but you're still pretty much tossing a coin.
Okay, it is 9:30, our expiry hour, but I'm going to give Richard Smiley a chance to tell us what he thinks about the White Sox.
Well, I'll just like put it this: the chances that they would be worse next year record wise, I would think are slim, but I don't think it's non-zero. I think it is possible because we don't know what they're doing. They've gotten rid of players, but they haven't added anybody, and it doesn't look like they're going to. So it's not clear, what the roster is going to look like. So, maybe we get together in the spring, we'll have a better idea of, okay, they've done just enough that yes, they will clear that 40 win bar, but I wouldn't I wouldn't hold my breath saying, yeah, I wouldn't bet on it being definitely that they're going to be any better this coming year. Um, I, I put it this way. I think they probably will, sight unseen, just win more games. Because I think, even if you look at Pythagorean and everything, they should have won 10 more games last year. Their bullpen was so awful that just historically, we had 2 games against the Cubs where we had 5-run leads after 6 innings. We blew, both games, back to back nights. And it was just that type of, our starters would give us leads and we were just dropping so many games that I think that's an easy patch that you just get a couple of veterans who can pitch a little and maybe, it doesn't have to be that expensive. You can do better. But beyond that, I don't, but I don't know if that actually translates to really being better. I just think it may be that they'll have a better record without necessarily being better. I'll leave it there.
Well, I will say I don't envy the Sox fans, but I have to say I really love the conceptual drawings for the new ballpark. If it ever happens, I'm not sure. I'm not saying they deserve it. I don't think they do deserve it, but if it ever happens, I really
Everybody
like that.
loved it. Those photos came out in the spring. Everybody was like, "Oh, wow, that would be so cool." And then the issue becomes of okay, how are you paying for this? Oh, never mind.
All right, so it's 9:32 Eastern. I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to say that when I came up with the idea for the joint meetings 2 years ago, I wasn't sure if they would work, and I wasn't sure if they worked, if we would lose enthusiasm after a while. And I want to compliment my other chapter leaders who have been
Yeah.
very supportive, both in terms of organizing the meetings and recruiting people, and everyone has participated because, as I said, I think this is our peak attendance.
Yeah.
We had 54 people at 8:25, which I believe is more than before, and so I'm
Yeah.
optimistic that next year will be even better. So
Yeah.
thank you all.
And
Take
John
care.
Buckeye, if you can get me a report by this weekend, I can get the newsletter out after the research meeting.
On it, Stu.
Beauty.
Sounds good.
Care.
Never doubted it.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
take
Yeah.
care.
Good night.